stand over here so I can see a little bit better. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for being here today. We're really excited about the direction that we're going to be laying out here. It's going to build off of a lot of things that we've done and set a new exciting opportunity up for Northwest Indiana. For those of you who are not aware, this update is a part of what's a statutory obligation the RDA has to give the state budget agency and the state budget committee from the legislature, which is a combined group between the administration and both houses in September, about what we're doing moving forward, about the $180 million allocation that was made in support of Westlake. So we'd like to again thank everybody who was committed to that and helped make it possible to include the Northwest Indiana delegation, the board of directors of the RDA, and all of our partners in the community. We all came together, state, local governments, the RDA, and we have a shared vision at this point, and we're moving forward with it. And I want to stress this vision today a little bit because we talk a lot about projects, and the projects are important because they are incremental steps forward. But our vision is simply put to make Northwest Indiana the first choice in Chicago for new and existing residents, the first choice for business to start or expand, the first choice for access to jobs both in the region and in Chicago. We believe that Northwest Indiana will be a leading area for growth in our state. We also believe we'll be the best example in the nation for balancing growth with preservation, developing exciting trendy urban and lakefront communities while maintaining pristine, tranquil, natural, and rural areas. We want to be the best example in the state of what Hoosiers can do when they're given a global opportunity. That is the vision for us within the statistical metropolitan area, metropolitan statistical data area, which we are part of. We're part of that Chicago metric. So while we often talk about being next to the third largest economy in Chicago, we're really a part of it already. So when we talk about moving forward on a vision like this, we focus in, one of our hallmarks is to do projects that are attainable and catalytic, that better position us to solve other problems within Northwest Indiana, take advantage of opportunities that are there for us. So right now we're talking about the case for connectivity. If you look at this, and many of you have seen this before, this is laying out what we've been in theory discussing, we now know to be absolutely true, which is connectivity equals prosperity and options and diversity of options. Cook County, as an example, has many rail lines. You have about 490 miles of commuter rail on their side of the border, and we have 33 miles of commuter, and which I have to say, it hasn't really been updated in 100 years. Westlake constitutes the first investment in commuter expansion in the state of Indiana in 100 years. Again, these are not just projects. This is a catalytic movement in the right direction toward achieving that goal of being the top choice in Chicago for the full diverse range of offerings. I want to tell you though, and you've probably heard this before, but I've come to understand it much better. Mike Nolan's here from Yankee. They have one line, and these guys have figured out everything they can do with that. They run a great rail, they've maximized that. But interestingly enough, when you talk about expanding their current facility, their creative minds and their standing in the industry get together, and there's so much more opportunity that we're going to show you today to really push communities forward. If we look at population, this is an interesting thing to understand. So we have great tax policy in Indiana, a lot of things to be proud of right now. We've prepped the place, we've done quality of place improvements for a decade now. If you look at the shoreline, it looks completely different. We have great things happening in places like Whiting and Hammond and East Chicago and Portage and so on. The fact though is that there was, since 1970, a small bleeding population from Cook County. It's about 4 or 5%. That largely has to do with relocation to the suburbs. Overall, the Chicago Metro grew tremendously as an economy and as a population base. If you look at what's happened in the north and west suburbs, they experienced a population growth of 226% since 1970, where we had an anemic growth of 4%. Most of that was in Porter County. They had a population loss in Lake County during that same time period. Now, if you think about how government works, and one of the metrics for success is growth, that's not a good sign. It produces a situation where we have less folks to share the burden of taxation, there's less economic activity, institutions suffer, and a lot of things happen that are not good. This slide represents yet another portion of this. So if there's a transit desert here, as it's often called, there's also a link between that and connectivity for wages. So green on this slide is good, red is is challenged. And so if you think about the 226% population overlay in the donut here, this is a 20-mile, and that's a 40-mile circle. All of our communities that we are targeting right now fall within that band. They're as close as places like DuPage County. And so we not only have, we have a couple of pockets of higher income. They're not enough to really change the direction here. And you can see even in the urban areas where there's been redevelopment in Chicago, incomes have been on the rise. Now what they all have in common is this rail connectivity. The other problem that's exacerbated by our lack of connectivity is that the higher income level areas also represent workforce talent. So if you're going to have a corporate headquarters, even though the tax is higher in Illinois, the barriers to entry in that economy are higher, they're more likely to go over here. What that does for everybody is cause more economic stimulus in the communities. And so we have a chance to be a part of that as we increase this move toward our plan in Chicago. But I think we're advantaged in the sense that if we are engaged in this process from top to bottom, we think about people who are living in the communities now, we think about rural, urban opportunities, the lakefront, environmental, and all the things that we mentioned in the vision. We have a chance to plan appropriately for this with our partners and not have the kind of urban sprawl, suburban sprawl that's happened in some of these areas too. We can avoid some of the things that happen that were not positive outside of just economic growth. Going the wrong way. So let's talk about projects a little bit here. The Westlake project today is going to be moving forward in a very significant way. As I said, we had secured $180 million for the first rail start in over 100 years in Indiana. Today, the RDA board will be considering advancing about $20 million to enter into what's called phase 2 of the federal process. You don't do that unless there's some informal affirmation, at least from the FTA, that you're heading in the right direction. We've had an extensive process going on in Westlake, and right now we have Farr & Associates engaged, which is a leader in the topic, working on the ground level with the communities to do TOD planning in the way that the community would like to see it. So those resources are on the ground now. They're doing some planning efforts around this concept, and today we're going to take a major step forward as we allocate $20 million to the process of going forward on Westlake. Also, Hammond, City of Hammond pledged obligation within this last week, and that was a major step forward in terms of finances. So now we have a product that we all think is good. We have more rail line on the Indiana side, so Indiana tax dollars are staying on our side of the border. The City of Hammond has a great opportunity, and now the finances are solidly in place to show the FTA that we have the local match, which is 50%. Our funding sources, you've seen these before probably. We will talk a little bit more about this as we go forward, but it just kind of affirms what I just said, which is we're in good shape financially to move forward on the project at this point. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about, and again, I keep reminding myself all the time, and I'd like to tell people too, think about what the vision is here. It's a set of projects that is aimed at this overarching goal that we've all talked about for years, we've heard in every meeting around. And so when we talk about double tracking, we'll take a little bit different approach than NICTE perhaps would on this, although they're in lockstep with us and understand this completely too. If you look at these little beacons here, these are the station areas. And we'll get into this later on in the discussion. When we talk about TOD, transportation-oriented development, we're talking about community redevelopment that's just merely anchored on transit, just like any other kind of anchor you have. Ours is a powerful anchor because you're connecting to the largest economy in the Midwest with this. So a lot of people would ask, well, why didn't we get good results in some of these areas before? We have a 100-year-old rail It's not necessarily designed to be flexible. It was not anticipating some of the commuter needs, and it certainly was not designed or updated to be able to compete with what's on the other side of the border, which is always double and mostly triple tracked. So when you talk about efficiencies, you're talking about time to market. So instead of being an hour from Gary, you're talking about cutting off into the 30 some odd minutes. We'll talk about this in a minute. What that means for real estate is day and night in the Chicago marketplace. So then you overlay that with looking at, okay, what about developments along these areas? And I think this is probably the most important takeaway from this, and what we're going to need as much help as we can get. If we are able to do double tracking and TOD development concepts on this north line in approximately the same time frame we're building out Westlake, instead of having the less challenging to develop areas, they have less infrastructure, things are a little bit more ready-made, and that's a good thing. But that stands alone a little bit more so than if we have a consolidated plan that we're showing the private sector market all at once. So what I'm saying is exciting about this is I think we have truly a project here that can transform the industrial corridor, along with helping with connectivity in the south. So now you have a consolidated direction to be what we're supposed to be in the Chicago market, and we have a consolidated project that has the offerings that would produce population growth in these areas that have been struggling with that for decades. It's not unlike what's going on in Chicago. A lot of these neighborhoods are very familiar to Chicago investors. It looks a lot like what happened over there the last 20 years. And what we're going to be doing is trying to engage with our partners, because our role in that is pretty narrow, to do the inclusionary things and take care of all of the issues that need to be accounted for while we're moving forward on major urban redevelopment projects. So let's talk about time to market. What does double tracking do, and how does that affect your development opportunities? These are kind of hard to see, but if you look at Hammond right now, they're at 42. We dropped to 28 minutes. East Chicago becomes 31 from 47. The Gary Airport is 37 from 55. Gary Metro becomes 39. Miller is about the same. Portage drops to 47 from 115. Think about how you're selling properties in those communities right now. Michigan City becomes basically close to an hour commute. So while you have these communities up and coming, they're doing their homework, they're doing the redevelopment projects, they're throwing in, what we're trying to do now is to position them to compete very soundly with their peer communities in Illinois that are many times more expensive to live in, and not often higher quality. Our communities have the metrics that many of those communities have over there in similar situations. So the planning process is very important to us. As we go forward, we're going to be continually working with the communities. And I just want to emphasize that this is not some prescribed process. This is about inclusion, and it's about understanding where the communities want to go, how they see themselves fitting in this. How do you want to look, and how do you want to feel, and how do you want to be? Which markets are there for you, and how do you want to really position your community to be a part of that? And so that's what the process has been about. We've had many, many conversations along the way, and we're going to continue to do that as we go forward. So we get into these area station plans, which we've been doing with the communities. It gets into very specific sort of outlays for zoning concepts, and what this really is about is saying to a private investor, so we're after new money to come into Northwest Indiana. This is what you're looking at. This is some certainty that you can put your investment behind. This is what the community is saying it wants to dedicate itself to, with its redevelopment commission, with its plan commission, with its BZA, with its mayor's office, and so on and so forth. That we agree that we would like to move in this format, and we have some agreed upon plans that you can plan on financially for your investments. This is I just used one example today of what a TOD actually looks like, because we talk about it a lot, but it's, unless you see something like this. So this is the Hammond Gateway Station. The Hammond Gateway Station is going to be a major part of the system, and as I said before, it represents a real positive addition. It is the nexus between the current South Shore and the Westlake. So when you talk about elevating the entire system, this becomes the metro station, so you can get on a train here and go north, south, east, or west. As far as community development is concerned, you can see we're projecting high density housing, some commercial on the first floor, realignment of transit around, non-rail transit, and parking facilities. So this will give you kind of an idea of what something like that would look like. You can kind of start to see the value of it. You can see the beautification process happening. You can imagine people spending money there. And instead of just getting in cars and going home, we're retaining economic activity. We're also putting people on the trains that don't necessarily need cars. And again, this is a short ride to downtown Chicago when this work is all done. So this should give you an idea.
Right on the upper left corner of that?
Yes.
So that's where the road's at.
And so you can imagine this in Miller. You can imagine this in East Chicago, Portage Ogden Dunes area, and clearly on the Westlake communities, something very similar to this. What's neat about that is each community offers a different niche in the market, so we're not replicating things throughout. Miller is a different market than downtown Hamlet, as is Portage different than the other two. So the collective system, when you talk to investors, you're talking about marina-served communities, urban redevelopment areas with short commutes, trendy restaurant districts, all across the board. Someone can look at this and say, you know, this looks like what I wish I would have gotten in on 25 years ago in the city of Chicago. What I'm going to do right now is ask Bill Sheldrake, who did the metrics on the study here, to comment on some of these important stats. So we're going to get into construction impact, the difference between Westlake without the double tracking, what does TOD mean, and what does it mean for people who never get on the train? What does it mean for our community in terms of population growth and wealth generation and opportunity?